Hello, Rolette, 10th graders. People, this book is killing me. I wish we were reading this together in class. I wish we had more time together. I really do. This is phenomenal. Painful book, people. I'm scared. Chapter 22. What happened was, as you already know, the verdict came back guilty. A totally unjust verdict. And Atticus's final speech to the jury was phenomenal. Some of the best literature I've ever read. Honestly, phenomenal. But now it's chapter 22. It was Jem's turn to cry. His face was streaked with angry tears as we made our way through the cheerful crowd. "It ain't right," he muttered, all the way to the corner of the square where we found Atticus waiting. Atticus was standing under the streetlight looking as though nothing had happened. His vest was unbuttoned, his collar and tie were neatly in place, his watch chain glistened. He was his impassive self again. "It ain't right, Atticus," said Jem. "No, son, it's not right." We walked home. And Alexandra was waiting up. She was in her dressing gown, and I could have sworn she had on her corset underneath it. "I'm sorry, brother," she murmured. Having never heard her call Atticus brother before, I stole a glance at Jem, but he was not listening. He would look up at Atticus and down at the floor, and I wondered if he thought Atticus somehow responsible for Tom Robinson's conviction. "Is he all right?" Auntie asked, indicating Jem. "He'll be so presently," said Atticus. "It was a little too strong for him." Our father sighed. "I'm going to bed," he said, "and if I don't wake up in the morning, don't call me." I didn't think it was wise in the first place to let them. "This is their home, sister," said Atticus. "We've made it this way for them. They might as well learn to cope with it. But they don't have to go to the courthouse and wallow in it. It's just as much Macomb County as missionary teas." "Atticus," and Alexandra's eyes were anxious, "you are the last person I thought would turn bitter over this." "I'm not bitter, just tired. I'm going to bed." "Atticus," said Jem bleakly. He turned in the doorway. "What, son?" "How could they do it? How could they?" "I don't know, but they did it. They've done it before, and they did it tonight, and they'll do it again, and when they do it, seems that only children weep. Good night." But things are always better in the morning. Atticus rose to his usual ungodly hour and was at the living room behind the Mobile Register when we stumbled in. Jem's morning face posed the question his sleepy lips struggled to ask. "It's not time to worry yet," Atticus reassured him as we went to the dining room. "We're not through yet. There'll be an appeal. You can count on that." "Gracious alive, Cal, what's all this?" He was staring at his breakfast plate. Calpurnia said, "Tom Robinson's daddy sent you along this chicken this morning. I fixed it." "You tell him I'm proud to get it. But they don't have chickens for breakfast at the White House. What are these?" "Rolls," said Calpurnia. "Estelle down at the hotel sent them." Atticus looked at her puzzled, and she said, "You better step out here and see what's in the kitchen, Mr. Finch." We followed him. The kitchen table was loaded with enough food to bury the family. Banks of salt pork, tomatoes, beans, even scuppermongs. Atticus grinned when he found a jar of pickled pig's knuckles. "Reckon Annie'll let me eat these in the dining room?" Calpurnia said, "This was all round the back steps when I got here this morning. They appreciate what you did, Mr. Finch. They aren't overstepping themselves, are they?" Atticus's eyes filled with tears. He did not speak for a moment. "Tell them I'm very grateful," he said. Tell them they must never do this again. Times are too hard." He left the kitchen, went to the dining room, and excused himself to Aunt Alexandra, put on his hat, and went to town. All these people are thanking him for the fact that he did the right thing, even if he didn't win. And this is both black folks and white folks. They are thanking him. They know what he did was right. We heard Dill step in the hall, so Calpurnia left Atticus's uneaten breakfast on the table. Between rabbit bites, Dill told us of Miss Rachel's reaction to last night, which was, "If a man like Atticus Finch wants to butt his head against a stone wall, it's his head." I'd have got her told," growled Dill, gnawing a chicken leg. But she didn't look much like telling this morning. Said she was up half the night wondering where I was, and she'd had the sheriff after me, but she was at the hearing. Dill, you've got to stop going off without telling her, said Jim. It just aggravates her. Dill said patiently, I told her till I was blue in the face where I was going. She's just seeing too many snakes in the closet. Bet that woman drinks a pint for breakfast every morning. No, she drinks 2 glasses full. Seen her. So his auntie is drinking, and she doesn't remember where Dill is going, but he tells her. Don't talk like that, Dill, said Aunt Alexandra. It's not becoming to a child. It's cynical. I ain't cynical, Miss Alexandra. Telling the truth's not cynical, is it? The way you tell it, it is. Jim's eyes flashed at her, but he said to Dill, Let's go. You can take that runner with you. When we went to the front porch, Miss Stephanie Crawford was busy telling it to Miss Maudie Atkinson and Mr. Avery. They looked around at us and went on talking. Jim made a feral noise in his throat. I wished for a weapon. I hate grown folks looking at you, said Dill. Makes you feel like you've done something. Miss Maudie yelled for Jim Finch to come there. Jim groaned and heaved himself up from the swing. We'll go with you, Dill said. Miss Stephanie's rose quivered with curiosity. She wanted to know who all gave us permission to go to court. She didn't see us, but it was all over town this morning that we were in the colored balcony. Did Atticus put us up there as a sort of, wasn't it right close up there with all those, did Scout understand didn't it make us mad to see our daddy beat? So it's bothering her. They were in the balcony. They were there at all, and they were there with the blacks, and did their dad put them up to it? And the conversation was something little kids shouldn't hear about, and just everything. Hush, Stephanie, Miss Maudie's diction was deadly. I've not got all morning to pass on the porch. Jim Finch, I called you out here. I called to find out if you and your colleague can eat some cake. Got up at 5 to make it, so you better say yes. Excuse us, Stephanie. Good morning, Mr. Avery. So this lady's taking the kids over to have some cake. There was a big cake and 2 little ones on Miss Maudie's kitchen table. There should have been 3 little ones. It was not like Miss Maudie to forget Dill, and we must have shown it. But we understood when she cut from the big cake and gave the slice to Jim. As we ate, we sensed that this was Miss Maudie's way of saying that as far as she was concerned, nothing had changed. She sat quietly on the kitchen chair watching us. Suddenly she spoke. Don't fret, Jim. Things are never as bad as they seem. Indoors, when Miss Maudie wanted to say something lengthy, she spread her fingers on her knees and settled her bridge work. This she did, and we waited. She settles her bridge work, okay? She's going to talk. She's going to fix her teeth, and then she's going to talk. I simply want to tell you that there are some men in this world who were born to do our unpleasant jobs for us. Your father's one of them. Oh, said Jim. Well, don't you well me, sir, Miss Maudie replied, recognizing Jim's fatalistic noises. You are not old enough to appreciate what I said. Jim was staring at his half-eaten cake. It's like being a caterpillar in a cocoon. That's what it is, he said. Like something asleep, wrapped up in a warm place. I always thought Macomb folks were the best folks in the world. At least that's what they seemed like. We're the safest folks in the world, said Miss Maudie. We're so rarely called on to be Christians. But when we are, we've got men like Atticus to go for us. So she's saying we need to stand up and do the right thing, and thankfully Atticus is one who will do it. Jim grinned ruefully. Wish the rest of the county thought that. You'd be surprised how many of us do. Who? Jim's voice rose. Who in this town did one thing to help Tom Robinson? Just who? His colored friends, for one thing, and people like us. People like Judge Taylor. People like Mr. Heck Tate. Stop eating and start thinking, Jim. Did it ever strike you that Judge Taylor naming Atticus to defend that boy was no accident? That Judge Taylor might have had his reasons for naming him? This was a thought. Court-appointed defenses were usually given to Maxwell Green, Macomb's latest addition to the bar, who needed the experience. Maxwell Green should have had Tom Robinson's case. You think about that, Miss Maudie was saying. It was no accident. I was sitting there on the porch last night waiting. I waited and waited to see you all come down the sidewalk, and as I waited, I thought, Atticus Finch won't win. He can't win, but he's the only man in these parts who can keep a jury out so long in a case like that. And I thought to myself, well, we're making a step. It's just a baby step, but it's a step. Now, she's saying that if anybody else had defended him, the jury'd say guilty right away. But these guys were struggling, in part, not enough, But the Atticus laid it out for them better than anybody could have. It's all right to talk like that. Can't say Christian judges and lawyers make up for heathen juries, Jim muttered. Soon's I get grown. That's something you'd have to take up with your father, Miss Maudie said. We went down Miss Maudie's cool new steps into the sunshine and found Mr. Avery and Miss Stephanie Crawford still at it. They had moved down the sidewalk and were standing in front of Miss Stephanie's house. Miss Rachel was walking towards him. I think I'll be a clown when I get grown, said Dill. Jim and I stopped in our tracks. Yes, sir, a clown, he said. There ain't one thing in this world I can do about folks except laugh. So I'm gonna join the circus and laugh my head off. You got it backwards, Dill, said Jim. Clowns are sad. It's folks that laugh at them. Well, I'm going to be a new kind of clown. I'm going to stand in the middle of the ring and laugh at the folks. Just look a-yonder, he said. He pointed. Every one of them ought to be riding broomsticks. Aunt Rachel already does. They're all witches. Miss Stephanie and Miss Rachel were waving wildly at us in a way that did not give the lie to Dill's observation. Oh, gosh, breathed Jim. I reckon it'd be ugly not to see him. Something was wrong. Mr. Avery was red in the face from a sneezing spell, and nearly blew us off the sidewalk when we came up. Miss Stephanie was trembling with excitement, and Miss Rachel caught Dill's shoulder. You get on in the backyard and stay there, she said. There's danger a-comin'. What's the matter? I asked. Ain't you heard it? It's all over town. At that moment, Aunt Alexandra came to the door and called us, but she was too late. It was Miss Stephanie's pleasure to tell us. This morning, Mr. Bob Ewell stopped Atticus on the post office corner, spat in his face, and told him he'd get him if it took the rest of his life. Mr. Ewell spat in Atticus's face. Can you believe that? Oh, people. This world is sometimes so corrupt. I can't stand it. Okay, this is a long chapter, but I'm going to keep going with it, okay? We're going to go chapter 23. Here we go. I wish Bob Ewell wouldn't chew tobacco. I wish Bob Ewell wouldn't chew tobacco, was all Atticus said about it. One time I had a kid spit me in the face. This is back when, a long time ago, I was a house father at the Central Institute for the Deaf, and a kid spat in my face. That's hard to take. And here's Atticus. I wish Bob Ewell wouldn't chew tobacco. That's his response to being spat in the face by Bob Ewell. That guy's got patience, way past me. According to Miss Stephanie Crawford, however, Atticus was leaving the post office when Mr. Ewell approached him, cursed him, spat on him, and threatened to kill him. Miss Stephanie, who by the time she told it twice, twice was there and had seen it all, passing by from the jitney jungle, she was. Miss Stephanie and Atticus didn't bat an eye, just took out his handkerchief and wiped his face, and stood there and let Mr. Ewell call him names wild horses could not bring her to repeat. Mr. Ewell was a veteran of an obscene war. That plus Atticus's peaceful reaction probably prompted him to inquire. Too proud to fight, you end-loving bastard? Miss Stephanie and Atticus said. No, too old. Put his hands in his pockets and strolled on. Miss Stephanie said, You had to hand it to Atticus Finch. He could be right dry sometimes. Jim and I didn't think it entertaining. After all, though, I said, he was the deadest shot in the county one time. He wouldn't carry a gun, Scout. He ain't even got one, said Jim. You know he didn't even have one down at the jail that night. He told me having a gun around's an invitation to somebody to shoot you. This is different, I said. We can ask him to borrow one. We did, and he said, nonsense. Dill was of the opinion that an appeal to Atticus's better nature might work. After all, we would starve if Mr. Ewell killed him. Besides, be raised exclusively by Aunt Alexandra, and we all knew the first thing she'd do before Atticus was under the ground, would be to fire Calpurnia. Oh boy, okay, so they're talking about, what if they kill his dad? Well, Aunt Alexandra's going to fire Calpurnia. Jem said it might work if I cried and flung a fit, being young and a girl, but that didn't work either. But when he noticed us dragging around the neighborhood, not eating, taking little interest in our normal pursuits, Atticus discovered how deeply frightened we were. He tempted Jem with a new football magazine one night. When he saw Jem flip the pages and toss it aside, he said, What's bothering you, son? Jem came to the point. Mr. Ewell. What has happened? What has happened? Nothing's happened. We're scared for you, and we think you ought to do something about him. Atticus smiled wryly. Do what? Put him under a peace bond? When a man says he's going to get you, looks like he means it. He means it when he meant it when he said it, said Atticus. Jem, see if you can stand in Bob Ewell's shoes a minute. I destroyed his last shred of credibility at that trial. If he had any to begin with, the man had to have some kind of comeback. His kind always does. So if spitting in my face and threatening me saved Mayella Ewell one extra beating, that's something I'll gladly take. He had to take it out on somebody, and I'd rather it be me than that house full of children out there. You understand? Jem nodded. Wow, isn't that... Atticus thought, I'd rather be angry at me and maybe not take his anger out on Mayella. That's amazing. Aunt Alexandra entered the room as Atticus was saying, we don't have anything to fear from Bob Ewell. He got it all out of his system that morning. I wouldn't be so sure of that, Atticus, she said. His kind would do anything to pay off a grudge. You know how those people are. What on earth could Ewell do to me, sister? Something furtive, Aunt Alexandra said. You may count on that. Nobody has much chance to be furtive in Maycomb, Atticus answered. After that, we were not afraid. Summer was melting away, and we made the most of it. Atticus assured us that nothing would happen to Tom Robinson until a higher court reviewed his case, and that Tom had a good chance of going free, or at least of having a new trial. He was at Enfield Prison Farm, 70 miles away in Chester County. I asked Atticus if Tom's wife and children were allowed to visit him, but Atticus said no. If he loses his appeal, I asked one evening, what'll happen to him? He'll go to the chair, said Atticus, unless the governor commutes his sentence. Not time to worry yet, Scout. We've got a good chance. Jem was sprawled on the sofa reading Popular Mechanics. He looked up. It ain't right. He didn't kill anybody, even if he was guilty. He didn't take anybody's life. You know rape's a capital offense in Alabama, said Atticus. Yes, sir, but the jury didn't have to give him death. If they wanted, they could have given him 20 years. Given, said Atticus. Tom Robinson's a colored man, Jem? No jury in this part of the world's going to say, we think you're guilty, but not very, on a charge like that. It was either a straight acquittal or nothing. Jem was shaking his head. I know it's not right, but I can't figure out what's wrong. Maybe rape shouldn't be a capital offense. Atticus dropped his newspaper beside his chair. He said he didn't have any quarrel with the rape statute, none whatsoever, but he did have deep misgivings when the state asked for and the jury gave a death penalty on purely circumstantial evidence. He glanced at me, saw I was listening, and made it easier. Before a man is sentenced to death for murder, say, there should be one or two eyewitnesses. Someone should be able to say, yes, I was there and saw him pull the trigger. But see, there's no corroborating it. It's all circumstantial. And so, yeah, that makes sense. You can't convict somebody to death based on just circumstantial evidence. But lots of folks have been hanged on circumstantial evidence, said Jem. I know, and lots of them probably deserved it too. But in the absence of eyewitnesses, there's always a doubt, sometimes only the shadow of a doubt. The law says reasonable doubt, but I think a defendant's entitled to the shadow of a doubt. There's always the possibility, no matter how improbable, that he's innocent. Then it all goes back to the jury, then. We ought to do away with juries. Jem was adamant. Atticus tried hard not to smile, but couldn't help it. You're rather hard on us, son. I think maybe there might be a better way. Change the law. Change it so that only judges have the power of fixing the penalty in capital cases. Then go up to Montgomery and change the law. He's in the legislature, so maybe he can do that. You'd be surprised how hard that'd be. I won't live to see the law changed, and if you live to see it, you'll be an old man. This was not good enough for Jem. No, sir, they ought to do away with juries. He wasn't guilty in the first place, and they said he was. If you'd been on that jury, son, and 11 other boys like you, Tom would be a free man, said Atticus. So far, nothing in your life has interfered with your reasoning process. There are 12 reasonable men those are 12 reasonable men in everyday life, Tom's jury, but you saw something come between them and reason. You saw the same thing that night in front of the jail. When that crew went away, they didn't go as reasonable men. They went because we were there. There's something in our world makes men lose their minds. They couldn't be fair if they tried. In our courts, when it's a man's word against a black man's, the white man always wins. They're ugly, but those are the facts of life. Doesn't make it right, said Jem stolidly. He beat his fist softly in his knee. You just can't convict a man on evidence like that. You can't. You wouldn't, but they could and did. The older you grow, the more of it you'll see. The one place where a man ought to get a square deal is in a courtroom, be he any color of the rainbow. But people have a way of carrying their resentments right into a jury box. As you grow older, you'll see white men cheat black men every day of your life. But let me tell you something, and don't you forget it. Whenever a white man does that to a black man, no matter who he is, how rich he is, or how fine a family he comes from, that white man is trash. Atticus was speaking so quietly, his last word crashed on our ears. I looked up and his face was vehement. There's nothing more sickening to me than a low-grade white man who'll take advantage of a Negro's ignorance. Don't fool yourselves. It's all adding up, and one of these days we're going to pay the bill for it. I hope it's not in you children's time. Jim was scratching his head. Suddenly his eyes widened. Atticus, he said, why don't people like us and Miss Maudie ever sit on juries? You never see anybody from Macomb on a jury. They all come from out in the woods. Atticus leaned back in his rocking chair. For some reason, he looked pleased with Jem. I was wondering when that had occurred to you, he said. There are lots of reasons. For one thing, Miss Maudie can't serve on a jury because she's a woman. You mean women in Alabama can't? I was indignant. I do. I guess it's to protect our frail ladies from sordid cases like Tom's. Besides, Atticus grinned, I doubt if we'll ever get a complete case tried. The ladies would be interrupting to ask questions. Jem and I laughed. Miss Maudie on a jury would be impressive. I thought of old Mrs. Dubose in her wheelchair. Stop that rapping, John Taylor. I want to ask this man something. Perhaps our forefathers were wise. Because she can imagine, they start thinking about these women serving on a jury and what it would look like, okay? Atticus was saying, with people like us, that's our share of the bill. We generally get the juries we deserve. Our stout Macomb citizens aren't interested in the first place. In the second place, they're afraid. Then they're afraid? Why? Asked Jem. Well, what if, say, Mr. Link Dees had to decide the amount of damages to award, say, Miss Maudie, when Miss Rachel ran over her with a car? Link wouldn't like the thought of losing either lady's business at his store, would he? So he tells Judge Taylor that he can't serve on the jury because he doesn't have anybody to keep store for him while he's gone. So Judge Taylor excuses him. Sometimes he excuses him wrathfully. What did make him think either of them had stopped trading with him, I asked. Jem said, Miss Rachel would, Miss Maudie wouldn't. But a jury's vote's secret, Atticus. Our father chuckled. You've many more miles to go, son. A jury's vote's supposed to be secret. Serving on a jury forces a man to make up his mind and declare himself about something. Men don't like to do that. Sometimes it's unpleasant. Tom's jury show made up its mind in a hurry, Jem muttered. Atticus's fingers went to his watch pocket. No, it didn't, he said, more to himself than to us. That was the one thing that made me think, well, maybe this may be the shadow of a beginning. The jury took a few hours. An inevitable verdict, maybe, but usually it takes him just a few minutes. This time, he broke off and looked at us. You might like to know that there was one fellow who took considerable wearing down. In the beginning, he was rarin' for an outright acquittal. Who? Jem was astonished. Atticus's eyes twinkled. It's not for me to say, but I'll tell you this much. He was one of your old Sarum friends. One of the Cunninghams? Jem yelped. I didn't recognize any of them. You're joking. He looked at Atticus from the corner of his eye. One of their connections, on a hunch. I didn't strike him, just on a hunch. Could have, but I didn't. Golly Moses, said Jem said reverently. 1 minute they're trying to kill him, and the next they're trying to turn him loose. I'll never understand those folks as long as I live. So the Cunninghams, that was one of the guys that came down to try and lynch Tom Robinson, okay? And now one of the Cunninghams was on the jury related, wanted to acquit him. Atticus said, you just had to know him. He said the Cunninghams hadn't taken anything from or off of anybody since they migrated to the New World. He said the other thing about them was, once you earned their respect, they were for you tooth and nail. Atticus had a feeling, nothing more than a suspicion, that they left the jail that night with considerable respect for the Finches. Then, too, he said, it took a thunderbolt plus another Cunningham to make one of them change his mind. If we'd had two of that crowd, we'd have had a hung jury. So if there'd been another Cunningham, maybe it would have happened, okay? But he said something happened that they ended up calling him guilty. Jim said slowly, you mean you actually put on the jury a man you wanted to kill you the other night before? How could you take such a risk, Atticus? How could you? When you analyze it, there was little risk. There's no difference between one man who's going to convict and another man who's going to convict, is there? There's a faint difference between a man who's going to convict and a man who's a little disturbed in his mind, isn't there? He was the only uncertainty on the whole list. What kin was that man to Mr. Walter Cunningham? I asked. Atticus rose, stretched, and yawned. It was not even our bedtime, but we knew he wanted a chance to read his newspaper. He picked it up, folded it, and tapped my head. Let's see now, he droned to himself. I've got it. Double first cousin. How can that be? Two sisters married two brothers. That's all I'll tell you. You figure it out. I tortured myself and decided that if I married Jem and Dill, and Dill had a sister whom he married, our children would be double first cousins. Gee, Minetti, Jem, I said when Atticus had gone. They're funny folks. Did you ever hear that, Auntie? Aunt Alexandra was hooking a rug and not watching us, but she was listening. She sat in her chair with her work basket beside it, her rug spread across her lap. Why ladies hooked woolen rugs on boiling nights never became clear to me. It's a hot night and she was working on an old woolen rug. I heard it, she said. I remembered the distant disastrous occasion when I rushed to young Walter Cunningham's defense. Now I was glad I'd done it. Soon school starts, I'm going to ask Walter home to dinner. I planned, having forgotten my private resolve to beat him up the next time I saw him. He can stay over sometimes after school, too. Atticus could drive him back to Old Sarum. Maybe he could spend the night with us sometime, okay, Jem? We'll see about that, Aunt Alexandra said, a declaration that with her was always a threat, never a promise. Surprised, I turned to her. Why not, Auntie? They're good folks. She looked at me over her sewing glasses. Jean Louise, there is no doubt in my mind that they're good folks, but they're not our kind of folks. Jem says, she means they're yappy, Scout. What's a yap? Ah, tacky, like they're fiddling and things like that. Well, I do too. Don't be silly, Jean Louise, said Aunt Alexandra. The thing is, you can scrub Walter Cunningham till he shines, you can put him in shoes and a new suit, but he'll never be like Jem. Besides, there's a drinking streak in that family, a mile wide. Finch women aren't interested in that sort of people. Auntie, said Jem, she ain't 9 yet. She may as well learn it now. Now here's Aunt Alexandra telling her about people drinking and stuff. And she's the one who always wants to protect the kids from hearing stuff like this, okay? Aunt Alexandra had spoken. I was reminded vividly of the last time she'd put her foot down. I never knew why. It was when I was absorbed with plans to visit Calpurnia's house. I was curious, interested. I wanted to be her company, to see how she lived, who her friends were. I might as well have wanted to see the other side of the moon. This time the tactics were different, but Aunt Alexandra's aim was the same. Perhaps this is why she'd come to live with us, to help us choose our friends. I would hold her off as long as I could. If they're good folks, then why can't I be nice to Walter? I didn't say not to be nice to him. You should be friendly and polite to him. You should be gracious to everybody, dear. But you don't have to invite him home. What if he was kin to us, Auntie? The fact is that he is not kin to us, but if we were, my answer would be the same. Auntie, Jem spoke up, Atticus says you can choose your friends, but you sure can't choose your family, and they're still kin to you no matter whether you acknowledge them or not, and it makes you look right silly when you don't. That's your father all over again, said Aunt Alexandra, and I still say that Jean Louise will not invite Walter Cunningham to this house. If he were her double first cousin once removed, he would still not be received in this house unless he comes to see Atticus on business. Now that is that. I really do not like Aunt Alexandra. She had said that indeed not, but this time she would give her reasons. But I want you to play with Walter. But I want to play with Walter, Auntie. Why can't I? She took off her glasses and stared at me. I'll tell you why, she said, because he is trash. That's why you can't play with him. I'll not have you around him, picking up his habits and learning Lord knows what. You're enough of a problem to your father as it is. I don't know what I would have done, but Jem stopped me. He caught me by the shoulders, put his arm around me, and led me sobbing in fury to the bedroom. Atticus heard us and poked his head around the door. It's all right, sir, Jem said gruffly. It's not anything. Atticus went away. Have a chew, Scout. Jem dug into his pocket and extracted a Tootsie Roll. It took a few minutes to work the candy into a comfortable wad inside my jaw. Jem was rearranging the objects on his dresser, his hair stuck up behind and down in front, and I wondered if it would ever look like a man's. Maybe if he shaved it off and started over, his hair would grow back neatly in place. His eyebrows were becoming heavier, and I noticed a new slimness about his body. He was growing taller. When he looked around, he must have thought I would start crying again, for he said, Show you something if you won't tell anybody. I said, What? He unbuttoned his shirt, grinning shyly. Well, what? Well, can't you see it? Well, no. Well, it's hair. Where? There, right there. He had been a comfort to me, so I said it looked lovely, but I didn't see anything. It's real nice, Jim. Under my arms, too, he said, going out for football next year. Scout, don't let Auntie aggravate you. So he's showing her, he's getting hair under his arms. He wants to distract her and kind of say, hey, I'm growing up, okay? Don't let Auntie aggravate you. It seemed only yesterday that he was telling me not to aggravate Auntie. You know she's not used to girls, said Jim. Leastways, not girls like you. She's trying to make you a lady. Can't you take up sewing or something? Hell no, she doesn't like me. That's all there is to it. And I don't care. It was her calling Walter Cunningham trash that got me going, Jim. Not what she said about being a problem to Atticus. We got that all straight one time. I asked him if I was a problem, and he said not much of one. At most one that he could always figure out, and not to worry my head a second about bothering him. No, it was Walter. That boy's not trash, Jim. He ain't like the Ewells. Jim kicked off his shoes and swung his feet to the bed. He propped himself against a pillow and switched on the reading light. You know something, Scout? I've got it all figured out now. I've thought about it a lot lately, and I've got it figured out. There's 4 kinds of folks in this world. There's the ordinary kind of folks. There's ordinary kind like us and the neighbors. There's the kind like the Cunninghams out in the woods. The kind that like the Ewells down at the dump, and the Negroes. But what about the Chinese and the Cajuns down yonder in Baldwin County? I mean in Macomb County. The thing about it is, our kind of folks don't like the Cunninghams don't like the Ewells, and the Ewells hate and despise the colored folks. I told Jim if that was so, then why didn't Tom's jury made up of folks like the Cunninghams acquit Tom despite the Ewells? Jim waved my question away as being infantile. You know, he said, I've seen Atticus put his foot where there's fiddling on the radio. Pat his foot when there's fiddling on the radio, and he loves pot liquor better than any man I ever saw. Then that makes us like the Cunninghams, I said. I can't see why Auntie... No, let me finish. It does, but we're still different somehow. Atticus said one time the reason Auntie's so hipped on the family is because all we've got's background and not a dime to our names. So Auntie's feels like we come from a very important family even though we don't have a lot of money. And so she wants to make sure that we see ourselves as different than others. So... Well, Jim, I don't know. Atticus told me one time that most of this old family stuff's foolishness because everybody's family is just as old as everybody else's. I said, did that include the colored folks and Englishmen and he said yes. Background doesn't mean old family, said Jim. I think it's how long your family's been reading and writing, Scout. I've studied this real hard, and that's the only reason I can think of. Somewhere along, when the Finches were in Egypt, one of them must have learned a hieroglyphic or two and be taught, and he taught his boy. Jim laughed. Imagine Auntie being proud of her great-granddaddy could read and write. Ladies pick funny things to be proud of. Well, I'm glad he could, or who'd have taught Atticus and them, and if Atticus couldn't read, you and me'd be in a fix. I don't think that's what background is, Jim. Well, then how do you explain why the Cunninghams are different? Mr. Walter can hardly sign his name. I've seen him. We've just been reading and writing longer than they have. No, everybody's got to learn. Nobody's born knowing. That's Walter. That Walter's as smart as he can be. He just gets held back sometimes because he has to stay out and help his daddy. Nothing's wrong with him. Nah, Jim, I think there's just one kind of folks. Folks. So she's saying, we're all the same. That's just the way it is. Jim turned around and punched his pillow. When he settled back, his face was cloudy. He was going into one of his declines, and I grew wary. His brows came together. His mouth became a thin line. He was silent for a while. That's what I thought, too, he said at last, when I was your age. If there's just one kind of folks, why can't they get along with each other? If they're all alike, why do they go out of their way to despise each other? Scout, I think I'm beginning to understand something. I think I'm beginning to understand why Boo Radley stayed shut up in that house all this time. It's because he wants to stay inside. Interesting. He comes back to Boo Radley. Boo's probably seen a lot of bad stuff, and he just doesn't want to see it anymore. Okie doke, guys. Thanks. You have a good one. Bye-bye.